on this. Yeah, thank you, Sachin, for doing this session for us on data-driven documentation. I think metrics is really important, and you'll tell us, of course, why. And we'll also hear from Sachin, like a short intro on himself. But just wanted to say thank you, and thanks to Mridula, who's taking on as a program manager for the series from this session. And thank you, Sharath, for continuing to oversee. There will be a feedback form at the end to make sure that you fill that up to get credit for this course. And if you have just joined in without signing up, do sign up also so that again you can get credit for the course. I think we have mentioned earlier that if you have done 5 sessions, you will get a certification from Twin MTD. Okay, with that, thanks, Sachin, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sandhya. Very good morning to everyone on the call today. I know it's difficult to kind of accommodate sessions during a working day, right? There's always something that comes up. So thanks for taking the time. Big thanks to Sandhya and the whole Manage the Doc team for this opportunity to connect with you. I, for one, really miss interacting with people right now that we've been sitting at home for so many years. I look forward to office opening and having physical conferences. Till then, this will have to do, I guess. Okay, so moving quickly to who I am. My name is Sachin. I've been in technical writing since '97, so that's about 25 years now, and that's the 25 you're seeing on the slide. During this time, I've had the good fortune of working with several organizations, with many talented people and thought leaders. Currently, I work at Microfocus. So what I'm presenting today is my experience, and in my view, how we can use data more effectively. But whatever I'm saying, I don't claim it to be original at all. I think I have benefited from standing on the shoulders of many a giants. And so a big thanks to all of them who've led the way on this subject. Yeah. Okay. So today's topic, data-driven documentation. That's what I shared with the team. But with documentation, what I mean is the content itself, the team, and the manager. Right? As managers, we are leading. We create the team. We nurture it. And this requires us to make a significant number of decisions, right? Around staffing, around tooling, around processes, around projects, and even investment, among other things. So this session will try and explore a few of the areas across this decision set where, as tech writing managers or leaders or practitioners, we can really benefit from using data and using this whole approach of data-driven decision making. So I'll share some of my experiments. I'll share some practices. But what I want you to remember is the calculations itself can be very, very detailed. And maybe it should be a one-day workshop where we collectively kind of go over the calculation and how we are deriving it and all of that. So to kind of fit into the time that has been given to me, what I've done is I have brought in the topic that might be of interest to you. And I'm jumping straight to the parameters that you can really gauge things on, right? So what should you measure and what it will tell you. So that's what I have done. The calculation itself might be lacking in that sense, but feel free to ask me more about it when we open up for questions, if any of that really interests you. So in terms of agenda, I'll start with some context setting, some basic definitions, and then jump into a few real examples, right? These are things that I have tried in the various organizations that I've worked. And at the end of it, I'll sum it up with how you can get started and some tips based on my own experience and some that, of course, I've derived from other people's experience. So let's get started on how we can be more data oriented and be more informed in our decision-making process, okay? What I have here on the screen, 25,000 hours, right? What this represents is the data that is being generated every second today. So if you took all the data that is generated through our use of Google, Facebook, YouTube, and all of the other apps, and put it together as a video to go through all the data generated in 1 second by all of the users across the world, you'll have to watch a 25,000-hour video. That's the amount of data that is available to us, right? But are we really using this data? So BARC, that's Business Application Research Center, they are one of the consulting and analysts in the space of data analytics. So they did a survey, and a question they asked some of the top organizations was, is data important for decision making? Okay. Results came in, no surprise. Almost 91% of them said, yes, data is very, very important for decision making. Then the second question went out was, do you use data for your decision making, right? And by data here, we don't mean casual data that you might have in your OneNotes and things like that. We're talking of having an established system process of really collecting, processing, and deriving those reports, kind of a thing, right? So that you have insights into those decision making. And surprisingly, only 57% of those organizations, with 91% agreed that's important, but only 57% of them were really using it. And here we are talking about business level intelligence, right? So these are insights for sales, these are insights for exec level decisions. If I kind of build on this and look at what might be happening within the tech writing world, I believe this number might be much lower. And this is shocking because statistics also prove that if you were to base your decisions or support your decisions with data, on an average, the company which is using this mechanism will see about 10% increase in their profit and reduce cost by about 10%, right? That's significant gain, yet the takers for data are much fewer. Um, I'm hoping that at the end of this discussion today, all of you will get intrigued and will look to try and use data more in your day-to-day activity. Okay. So before I jump into data and data analysis itself, a word of caution. In the words of Mark Twain, data is like garbage. Okay. So you better know what you're going to do with it before you collect it. Otherwise, you're going to get drowned. It's just going to pile up all over the place. So it's important to kind of go in with a specific need and a specific uh, reason for kind of doing it. A few definitions. What is data? Something I picked up from Wikipedia. Data is basically a statistical unit, right? A unit of information. Uh, for statistics purpose, numbers are easier, but we do collect text data also and perform different kind of analysis on that. As technical writing practitioners, here are some data sources that you can use, right? Or I have used personally. The first one is the expense or the cost profile itself. Financial data about your organization, uh, looking at what are the salaries, what are the costs of tools, what are other costs that you're incurring, and how you're managing that. Project tools. By this, I refer to wherever you are planning and executing your projects, right? It provides a lot of information about your effort, about your estimates, about feature coverage, dependencies that might be there. And all of those numbers are something that we can use to improve the efficiency in our organizations. Then there's the CMS. Now, by CMS, what I'm trying to cover is everything that you're using today for your authoring, for your version control, branching, building, all of that. So any system that you use today, any tool that you use today to be able to successfully deliver your documentation is what I mean to cover by mentioning the CMS tools. Then there might be some automation jobs. Anybody using a real CMS will have a lot of jobs there. All of these jobs provide you detailed logs, and there is so much data there that can be used. Web analytics, I think I don't have to kind of call it out as much. Google, and there are other analytics from Adobe and others. A lot of us use it already, and we know that it provides us a lot of data. And finally, the support data, the tickets that are created when a customer hits an issue and calls for support, and what is being captured as resolution around it. Okay. Then there is the whole aspect of analysis itself, right? Again, a definition from Wikipedia. Basically, what we're looking at is taking those numbers, putting it in a format where we are able to kind of slice and dice them and get to derive actionable insights from. That is what analysis is, right? There are various models available to you. For most parts, my own attempts have been limited to the qualitative and quantitative analysis. We are kind of dabbling with some text analysis and predictive analysis, but they are also, according to me, derivatives of qualitative and quantitative analysis. So that's what we use. You want to know more about it, please Google them. There's enough data there about it. So I'm not going to cover it right now. So good. So now let me jump into some real world examples of where we can apply this data-driven approach. Here are a few of the applications that I intend to cover. Let's quickly jump into web analytics, right? This is something that most of you are using. I think when I was looking at the participant list here, I could see so many of you who I have discussed this with, and we've kind of seen what kind of insights we can drive from there. So just a quick uh, show of value here so that you know what I'm saying is true, right? One popular dimension in your web analytics is that of overall traffic, right? Page views. This is important because this tells us if people are really using the data. So you can take a number. What you're seeing is a monthly number for our site today. And what you can do is compare it month on month, right? At least in the initial phases, you should start to see a month on month increase. At some point, it will plateau. But at that point, it's important to kind of reflect and see if this matches your user base. Right? So if you sold it to 10 customers and you know that there are approximately 10 people in each company kind of using it, that's a user base of about 100. If they are really using the product, you should see somewhere around 100, right? Plus minus 15%. That's the kind of numbers that you can derive from this one. Okay. So look at the page views to kind of know what is your overall traffic profile. Then the second aspect that you can look at is the average session duration. What this is telling us is how much time the user is spending on your site. The longer the duration, the better for us, because short durations, especially if it's in seconds, it's probably telling us that we need to deep dive and figure out what's going wrong there, right? So, for example, if your number is good, let's say it's 20, and if you look at how many pages on an average a customer is looking at during that duration, let's say that number is 10, there is another analytics calculation that you can do, which is look at the average reading time of the page and then multiply it by the number of pages that on an average the user is looking at, and then compare it with your average session time. Your average session time should be more than that baseline. Okay. Then my favorite, bounce rate. Bounce rate is favorite for me because it really puts the overall traffic in context. Now, you might be getting 1 million views a month, but if 50% of them are bouncing off, so if your bounce rate is at 50%, what it is telling you is that you're getting people to your site, but they're not the right people, right? So they didn't find the topic relevant, and they just bounced off after coming to that topic where they landed. Two common remedial actions that are done by practitioners. One is to look at the topic title. Sometimes in our effort to make things simple and easy, what we end up doing is make the topic title very, very generic, right? And when you make it generic, it starts to show up on different search, top of the list. The keyword that people were using was there, and they click and come, and they may not even be users of a product. So when you make those page titles more unique and specific, you will be able to kind of bring down the bounce rate. One of the other actions that you can do is look at the metadata itself, right, which is driving all the search results. And sometimes that needs rework because we might be using almost every keyword that is possibly available there in our metadata, and that needs to be reworked to kind of bring the bounce rate down. Okay. Then there is the view of uh, how we can kind of get insights on what can be done. A lot of practitioners, what they do is they will pop up a feedback mechanism there, right? So if people are exiting or moving away from a page, they will pop up a box like this, a prompt, which asks them how useful the data is. While this prompt is useful in general to get feedback, especially from people who are spending more time on your site, I don't believe it really helps you address the problem of the bounce rate. Okay, because when somebody's exiting the site because they ended up coming somewhere where they didn't mean to come, they're not going to spend time giving you this feedback. Then there is the measure of the top pages and content, right? So what this helps you realize is what is it that the user really appreciates? What are they searching for? What are they seeking? And this will help you focus your effort. And as I go through some of the other applications, you will see that this data of what people are really seeing and what they're not seeing can help us define the scope of documentation. Okay, so learn from these pages, very important, provide some very valuable information. And finally, the search terms themselves, right? So when you use analytics, you can track the most common keywords that the users are putting into search. What they provide us insights into are one, their need, right? So in terms of a website, they came there, there are different topics. What are the topics that are really of interest, right? And this can correlate with your top page content or page views, and you can kind of correlate and see if this is making sense. The second thing that it tells us, and this one to me is very, very important, is the vocabulary. What is the term that the user is using? And it's not about us creating so many acronyms and putting out new language out there, just adding to their learning curve. It's about aligning to what they use. It's aligning to their vocabulary. And so the search keywords for me drive what we will do in terms of terminology. Then there's, of course, metadata. And finally, the migration use cases, right? Let's say you have a feature which was deprecated and you introduced a new feature to kind of replace this tech. And if the user continues to search for the older keyword, then it's a pointer that the migration use case is probably not being managed well, right? So you want to kind of add those terms into this page and say this is the replacement and not just limit it to your release notes. Okay, good. Moving on, the second application that you can look at, and this one again is very popular among doc managers who are trying to kind of build a case around the value that our teams bring and how much should be the investment on this team because we are kind of deflecting support cost, right? Two measures, or rather two aspects to kind of really look at it. The first aspect is the support cost deflection itself. What is the total impact that we've had on the support cost? Did our documentation really help you cut down your expense on support? Kind of not very accurate representation, when you look at just the number of tickets, right? While a lot of experts will swear by looking at the total number of tickets that were created, I believe it's driven by a lot of other things, right? There is the phase in which the product might be. It might be an indication of the adoption of the features by the customer. So you'll have to take a lot of other data points to kind of really reflect on the total number of defects when you're trying to support your logic of support cost reflection. But the other two statistics that might be of interest to you, and these are just numbers, right, that you can pick up, is one, how many defects were really logged saying it needs a doc update, right? Or the doc is wrong. And second, how many of the support cases were really closed by sharing a doc link or referring to a doc? Because that's the real measure in my mind of how much we have supported here, right? How much we were able to reduce this whole CPE effort for the company because the doc was enough to kind of close the support call. The second aspect is the customer focus itself, right? And I use this term because I couldn't think of a better term to kind of represent this. But what I mean by customer focus is somebody has bought a product and post purchase, what kind of experience is being provided to them, right? And from a doc perspective, what we need to look at is three particular aspects, right? One, for a given doc set, what is your defect backlog? How many defects are really sitting out there, right? So we say, okay, we have 100 defects or 200 defects. It's just the backlog sitting there. Every day that goes by is just causing more frustration for the customer. So the backlog is a very good number to kind of track when you're looking at the support that you're providing to your customers. The second is around the burn down rate, right? So if you have, let's say, 100 defects, and each month you're getting 20 defects coming in, your burn down rate needs to be higher than the inflow. So if you are not able to close defects faster than the inflow, then you're really fighting a losing battle there. And that is a good indicator or a good measure for you to figure out if you need to change your strategy on what you're doing with the defects. Right? It might mean that you have to get some additional contractors or get some additional writers or look at all the defects and see what else can be done with it. Right? So, but it calls for a change in your approach to this whole defect fixing program. And finally, a true measure is the life or the age of the defect, right? What is your turnaround time? On an average, once a defect is opened to when you close, if you calculate that for each defect and multiply it by, I mean, add it up for all the defects and divide it by the number of defects you have, it'll give you approximately the age for each defect. The longer the age, the longer has been the turmoil for the customer. So measure this. There is no right number, right? So it's not to say that your turnaround time has to be 7 days or 14 days, because a lot of this is driven by how projects are planned and executed. But as an organization, you need to have a bar which tells you that, okay, my turnaround time cannot be more than this. I have to kind of close it. These SLAs are very common in service organizations, especially in the support organization, but I think it's also important for the doc team to kind of get it in. All right, good. Moving on, let's look at staffing and allocation, right? How can we use data in staffing and allocation? As managers, this is going to be one of your biggest impact areas. I think around staffing itself, when it comes to really hiring people and how much we pay, there are enough guidelines available from the HR, right? So every organization's HR will come back and tell you, let's do a 4-box, 6-box, let's look at the compa ratio, let's do a team design pyramid or a reverse pyramid, depending on the complexity of your projects. So those guidelines are available to you from your HR. So I'm going to skip that part. right? I don't think I need to give you more details on that. But what I'm going to focus here on are two very important aspects of staffing and allocation. If you talk to any team in tech writing today, right, and I've kind of experienced it quite a lot, the most common statement, and I'm not saying everybody says it, but the most common statement that you'll hear from the team is, we are short staffed, we are overloaded. If you go to your boss and you say, hey, I want more writers, the most common statement that you're going to hear is, we need you to do more with what you have. So it really comes down to the decision on which way you want to kind of negotiate. And again, data is going to come to your aid here. So I have two graphs here for you. One around capacity planning itself, right? So here is a sample graph. I just picked it off Google. What this is showing you is that in a project, there are 4 people assigned. Out of the bandwidth that they have, right, or the capacity that they have, the utilization is lower than the capacity. If the utilization is lower than the capacity, like this graph is showing, what this graph particularly is showing you is that you have one extra person in this team. So this team is not short-staffed, you're overstaffed it, and you're not utilizing the available capacity to the maximum. So if this is the graph that you're getting from your project planning tool, where you're tracking all of these data, change your staffing. But let's say this graph is different, right? And the capacity utilization is really overutilized. Then that is the data with which you can probably go to your boss saying, we need more writers, and here is data to support all the work that is being asked of them. Or at least we can start a conversation about the scope of work that the team will sign up for. And that probably is the best kind of approach that we'll have, because that will make all parties happy, right? The second aspect of allocation that I suggest that we look at is the feature planning itself, right? While all of us, hello,
You were at
Sachin?
capacity planning?
capacity
Yeah,
planning. Okay,
yeah.
all right. Let me go back to capacity planning. Okay,
You had shared the utilization graph. Yeah,
okay.
this is
So
it.
I'll start again from here, right? So, like I said, the staffing part, I think there are enough guidelines that are available to all of us from our HR in terms of various tools and math that we can do. So I'm not going to get there. I'm going to talk about what we do within our projects, right? Because that's something that nobody else is telling us about. So capacity planning. Every team tells us that they're overloaded or they are kind of understaffed, and our bosses are always telling us to do more with what we have. So one kind of data that I look at when I have to figure out who I need to negotiate with is the capacity utilization itself. Now, this data is something that I'm deriving from the project planning tool. So you look at what is the capacity that is available within the team, and then you look at what was really utilized in a release, right? So at the start, we've already allocated, but the end of the release, you want to also see what was the utilization. Based on the utilization, if the graph looks like what you're seeing on the screen right now, if I have to derive what I understand from this, this is showing that we clearly have one extra person on the team. We should reduce our staffing on this team. And second, look at what has happened with the estimates. Why did we end up here? Another way of looking at this is to take an additional data about when was work getting done. So during your release cycle, if you kind of plot saying when was the load, how much, that will also provide you an insight that sometimes the project execution itself is very, very lopsided, right? So the developer is saying, hey, I've not finished anything, and it might come towards the end, And that's why the writers are like overloaded towards the end, but the start there is not there. So depending on what you're seeing, you might want to kind of reduce your staffing or increase your staffing. So take that discussion to your boss, show them this data. And if you're seeing that loading is a problem across the project, right? So the load is kind of too much at the end and nothing at the beginning or any other way. That's a process discussion. That's a discussion that you have to have with the bigger project team and convince them that we have to kind of work a certain way. It could also provide you with some opportunities to staff the team in a variable fashion. So let's say you have a pool of writers, so managing 2 projects, and you kind of move people around knowing that at certain phases we are going to see lesser effort and that capacity can be utilized in other place. So those are some of the things that you can do with your capacity data itself. Okay. The second aspect that you can look at is the feature planning. And this is to me one of the ignored areas, right? While we spend a lot of effort in planning and estimation, and we spend a lot of time in tracking the execution, uh, very few teams that I know of actually do a retro of the estimation. So if you look at a feature, and in my company we use another angle to it, or another kind of perspective of the complexity of the feature. So if you take the actual and you take the planned or the original estimate, and then you add the complexity to it to get to a weighted average, it will provide you data points that you can kind of incorporate into your estimation standards so that your estimates are more and more accurate, which helps you again manage the load and get to more appropriate staffing on the projects. Okay, good. Moving on to documentation scope. So when we were going through Google Analytics, I told you that there is a data point which points to really negotiating the scope of work. Yeah. So let me tell you something that we did in one of my teams, right? So at Micro Focus, we have a dedicated information architecture team. And what they do is they do audits of the documents on a regular basis, compare it with the analytics, and try and figure out all those gems which will help us kind of manage things better. So in one such audit, what we realized is that while we had a lot of pages which were top viewed, while we had a lot of incoming traffic, there were a large part of the topics in a doc set which were getting almost negligible views or zero views. So we drilled down a little more, and what we found was that these topics were related to UI procedures, right? And when you look at these UIs, these are self-explanatory UIs, right? It's like saying the login screen needs a help doc. Most of us don't even look at the login screen help doc because we know it's the username password. If they're using something special, there will be cues on the login screen. And that kind of a procedure doc rarely gets used. And that is what we were seeing with a lot of these pages which are getting like negligible views. So we took this hypothesis that people don't need documentation for self-explanatory pages. And then we looked at this data across other products. And we found this pattern to continue there. So what did we want to do? We proposed that we stop documenting these pages, right? And there was a lot of back and forth, and there was a lot of heavy lifting with the stakeholders to convince them. And what we realized at the end of that discussion, or where we arrived at the end of the discussion, was that we really don't need these procedures. And what we probably need to do in its place is stop documenting at field level and start talking at the topic level. So if somebody needs to move across 4 different screens to achieve a use case, maybe saying login, create a user, assign them to a user group, assign rights to user group. That's all we have to write. You don't have to go in and say, okay, search for the user, drag and drop from left to right. That level of detail is not required. So we went from this UI based documentation where we were totally documenting every screen to probably a use case based documentation, very debated definition of use case, but for my sake, understand what I'm trying to say here, right? So instead of being at a feed level, we went to a page level and we were looking at the user journey rather than focusing on documenting every single field. But this is a decision we took based on the data that we saw. It helped us kind of have this negotiation. What it did in turn was it saved us approximately 25% capacity on one of the recent projects. So originally I was going to have 4 writers on the team, but when once we took this decision that we don't want to document every field, we were able to manage with just 3. So that's what I meant by saying that Google Analytics and the data that you're getting from there can help you support some of these conversations about the scope of work. Okay. The next two, beyond um, the documentation scope, areas where we have applied analytics and seen benefits, are more related to the automation work that I've been doing. So in some of the previous conferences, I've spoken about it, even in the TC World conference, all the automations that we're doing within our team. So these applications came more as a derivative of it. It's not something that I approached with. So there is the automation which makes me more convinced about it. But I think from all of your perspectives, it is still valid till you are able to statistically look at it. Okay, you don't need an automation to do this, but I will say that I automated it, right? So release readiness. Is the document ready to go out on the day of the release? What do we do? Traditionally, if you look at most of the organizations, what they will do is they will do a peer review or a sanity check, look for broken links, look for images being broken, run a spell check, all of those production readiness checks that we do. And then we say, okay, document is ready, let's put it out. What we did was we used a few linters and scripts to check for the same thing. What everybody is using, we check for the same thing and we derive a score. Okay. What you're seeing on screen is the quality score, and that's like a report card that comes out for every doc set. And what it tells the manager is whether this document is ready to be published or not. So based on the scores, and we know some things will be broken, some will be not. So we generate a report and send it to the writers to fix. But in its current state, is it really ready to go out or not? Does it meet the quality standard that we've set? So for us, on a scale of 100, we decided that 70 was going to be that cutoff. The score that you're seeing is definitely below 70. And that's why the program tells me that this document fails the check. It should not really go out. But we know how everybody will just pounce on us if the document doesn't go out on that day. So there is a manual override available to the manager and they can decide and say, yeah, I will go ahead and publish this. But here are some reports which my writers will fix over the next 1 week. But what this is doing is it's giving me a score, right? So in the second screen, you can see that that particular doc set passed. And it will automatically get published for us and we don't have to think twice about it. Okay. Again, we're using weighted average and that's how we are able to kind of score it within 100. So just to give you a sense of what are the things that we are measuring, these are suggestions. If it works for you, you can use them. If it doesn't work for you, you can kind of add other things that work for you. Right? The first one, like I said, the usual sanity check, check for broken links, check for broken images. Right? The second one, check for your project plan. See if all the features that were marked for documentation, have they been documented? So what we do is we poll our project tracking tool and see how many uh, features were marked as doc required. And then we go and compare it with what were the feature IDs used when creating or saving the pages. So that tells us if the feature was documented or not. And then we have the approval process, right? So which tells us if the content has been reviewed and approved by SMEs. Does it follow the agreed terminology? So that's what the linter does. And then we have another essential check on some of the sections which we think are essential for a doc to go out, right? A release note being one, glossary being one, and that's what we check for. And finally, the defect backlog, right? Like I was telling you earlier, there is the customer experience part which we want to constantly track and move forward. So we have taken up a goal where we are saying we're going to fix so many defects. So that's why that's one of the parameters for us. Like I said, all of these are suggestions. This is what we are using. You can see what works for you and kind of derive this. But I think there is a lot of value in doing this mathematically rather than just going with, okay, I have done a peer review, I have done this check, I've run a spell check. Those are very, very manual ways of doing it, right? And when you have to really scale and when you talk about agile and monthly releases and 3-month releases, it's going to get increasingly difficult to stick with this manual process that we have. And the second part is we're never going to get the perfect score, right? So there will be some variation in the score that you might get against any of these checks. Now, that's something that you can only statistically kind of mitigate. If you have to take a call on every single deviation by yourself, it's going to be very difficult, especially if you are working at a larger scale. Okay, good. A final sample of what you can apply data and statistics on is performance evaluation. I'm sure all of the managers who've been managers for at least a year have already figured out a method that works for you. That you might be taking down those small notes in OneNote or sending emails to yourself and putting it in that folder. And then you're trying to kind of process it and write the feedback for your team at the end of the year. And a large part of performance assessment is also uh, kind of evaluating the behavioral and soft skill part of us being professionals and what we do at office. But there is also an equal part which can be statistically driven. Okay. Again, I have a report card for you to visualize. Think of it like a report card in school. Tell me what is the accuracy of somebody's estimation. Right? It can, now you've seen in the previous applications that I can measure accuracy of estimates. Look at their load, capacity, velocity. Whenever they're free, are they taking up something else? Did they fix more defects just because they had a free cycle in a sprint? Now, those are things that, again, data-wise is available in your project planning tool. Pick it up, put it in this graph. Right? Look at the content itself. Now, does it meet your grammar expectations or MSTP expectations or formatting expectations? All of these, again, are available as numbers if you really compute it in your CMS or any file, right? You can just use a basic linter till you have an HTML, you can run it through it, and it will tell you all of these things. There are enough plugins and software available, including Word, right? So it can tell you what is the readability, if there is verb mismatch or there is passive active. All of those things are just settings, and you can measure these and point out how good is the writing of a writer. So this doesn't have to be subjective anymore. So these are some of the aspects that you can kind of put into uh, the report card. Again, you'll have to wait it out. It has to be a weighted average. It won't go by just like that. And with that, a large part of your assessment is going to be data driven. Of course, what you have put into those folders or OneNotes, those observations that you made, that is also data, and that is going to come in for the software aspects of things. But the skill aspect of things will or can be derived through these statistics. Okay.
Sachin, just 10 minutes more, just a heads up. And
Sure.
there are some questions also on the chat, which you can get to in a bit. Yeah, thanks.
Yes. Yeah, I'm done. So final words, right? So if you want to get started with using data in your day-to-day activity, these are the steps. Okay. First, have your strategy in place. Know what you really want to do. Then identify what are those aspects within your strategy, or what are those questions within your strategy which you need answered. And once you have those questions, go dig into data. Okay, don't come the other way around. Don't look at data and try to figure out, okay, what can I know, and then try to see if I can fit it into my strategy. When looking at data, derive actionable insights. There are always observations. Yeah? And most of us enjoy the observations more than actionable insights. But for applying data in your day-to-day decision making, the need is to derive actionable insights. And finally, it's a very time consuming job. Okay, so keep the benefit effort ratio in your mind. Uh, Only invest as much as the value you can derive out of it. And to close with a few tips from my own experience. And of course, there are others who said this before me. If you're seeing a graph and the graph is only going up or is going in one direction, it's probably wrong, okay? Because if you take a large enough data set, which is meaningful, you will see fluctuations in the graph. There is no data set which will all point to one thing. Deriving from the same thing, if all the data 100% says your hypothesis is right, your data set is wrong. Because never ever are you going to get 100% support for your data, for your hypothesis. Tradition and constraints can be questioned, right? Just because you've been doing something a certain way doesn't mean you should not break it. Same way, the constraints, they limit us. So break the constraints and think out. I think it applies to everything in life, not just data analysis, but it applies as much here too. Despite what you do, despite the logic, despite the math, there is the sentiment part of it which needs to be actively managed in your change management. And that's something that you'll have to do beyond data analysis, right? Data can only take you so far. There is the whole sentiment management that you'll have to do. Limit your number of KPIs. Like if you look at Google Analytics itself, there are so many parameters that it will kind of report data on. It's impossible for us to use all of it unless I have a company or an army of people just looking at statistics and giving me inputs. So with the limited resources you have, the best value will come from limiting the number of KPIs that you will check. Analysis paralysis is real. So analyze only to a certain limit, right? After that, it's okay to just take a decision and move one direction. There is only 50% chance that you will fail, and there's the equal 50% chance you will pass, right? Or you will succeed at what you're doing. So don't get into this analysis paralysis. And finally, data can only support your decision. The decision is always yours. Data will never decide for you. So use data to support what you want to do. Don't be driven by the data as much. Okay. Okay, thanks. That is what I had put together. I hope you found this useful. I am open for questions now.
Um, Hi, Sachin. This is
Hi.
Mridula. Thank you for such a wonderful session. I'll just take a minute to request everyone to use the feedback form to share your feedback about this wonderful session. And if you wish to, conduct a session like Sachin, please do mention in the feedback form. I'm sharing the feedback form again in the chat.
Okay, so I have the chat
I
open.
think, yeah, Samir, you had a question earlier in the session. Do you want to ask him a question?
Yeah. Hi, Sachin. Yeah.
Hey.
So in the initial couple of slides, you did talk about the page views and other stuff.
Yes.
So especially when we look at web analytics,
Yes.
right? So yeah, I had this question. I think the earlier chat got closed. So
Yes.
we sort of work in a company where we are looking towards building DIY features, right? So
Okay.
where we expect the users to be able to uh, perform or navigate through the fields on their own, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So while this is an objective on one side, on the other
Mm-hmm.
side, we are also trying to look at increasing page views month on month.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it mean? I mean, when we say the page view necessarily increases month on month, does it mean that the product is still at a lower level of intuitiveness and therefore we need to look at the product again? Or does it mean that yes, increasing page views are good because we are gaining momentum there? How do we basically balance these things? What is your
Wow.
views?
Well, that's a big question, right? So many
Yes.
aspects it's touching. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Page view is just a measure, okay? And how we interpret it is what we have to kind of see, okay? Or don't start with page view and say, okay, what can I derive from it? Like I said in the getting started slide, right? Start with the question you have and then see if the data supports it, right? So the page view increasing or decreasing uh, by itself is just an observation. So if you have a question saying, okay, a lot of the screens on our product are self-explanatory and the user will be able to breeze through this. Is this true? Let's say that's the question. Then what you do is go and look at the page views for that particular procedure, right? And if it's really getting zero or negligible page views, then it supports your theory that your screens are self-sufficient, right? So when I was talking of the doc scope, I gave you an example, and that's what it means. Similarly, if you have like a increasing user base, right? And most enterprise products are complex. So let's assume for once that uh, user base increase will reflect on increase in numbers. So if you're really selling your products to more and more people each day, then the number of users are increasing, and so your page view has to kind of increase. So that will be an observation. But now let's ask the question, right? Are users using our product? Now, if they were really using the product, they will need to use the help. Since there is an increase in the user base, the page view has to go up. So then you look at it and say, yeah, the page view is going up, and this kind of supports that, yeah, the additional sales that we've done, people are really using the product. So you'll always have to approach from a question first, and then look at data to see if it is providing the answer. Otherwise, the data itself going up or down is just an observation. Uh, we can kind of spin it any way we like.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to touch upon one of the interesting points that you made
Sure.
actually, when we were talking about the product screens being intuitive and
Sure.
therefore at what level you will build the content. So you
Yes.
made a point on ensuring that some of the topics can have at a topic level information rather than talking about the field level
Yes.
procedures, which is a
Yeah.
very good insight actually, because we have been trying to, establish that to an extent, and
Yes. Yes.
that's a
uh,
great point.
yeah. Yeah. So when we were originally taking this decision, I was kind of very skeptical, right? Because it goes against what all doc teams have been doing for such a long
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
But once we kind of took that decision and we kind of found out a way to kind of compensate for it, we were more confident. And today, if you go and look at MSTP, even they are suggesting the same thing, saying if it's an obvious screen, don't document it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sachin. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions, or I can go through the chat. I think, Mridula, you were talking about what are the metrics that will help us come up with these figures. Do you know
I
which
was
slide you are
referring
talking about?
to, yeah, I was referring to the utilization and capacity.
Yeah, utilization and capacity. So this is coming from the project management tool, right? Where you are putting your estimate, and every time you're doing some work, you're putting in your effort. So if you create dashboards from this data, you
Okay,
will see those screens. Yeah.
okay, cool. Sachin, I have one more question, and this
Yes,
is
please.
related to the companies, like especially in the hardware domain,
Okay,
who publish their documents in form of PDFs. So
correct.
when information is in the form of PDFs, it's very
Mhm.
difficult to get the analytics on those. So what kind
Sure.
of metrics would you suggest that can measure, the effectiveness of the documentation?
So I think in the case of PDFs, which are just going out and not necessarily on a distribution site, there are you're limited, right? So there are no web analytics to play with.
Right.
So what you can look at is from your download site,
Mm-hmm.
how much download is happening. That's one thing that you can look at.
Okay.
But usually that data does not help as much because for most companies, what will happen is a system admin will go ahead and download it, put it at a shared location, and then the team is only looking at that. So
Right.
every user is not downloading the PDF, so that data kind of is questionable. But I
Right.
think in such cases, what you can really fall back on is the support data,
Got it.
right? So how many times did support really close the issue by referring to a page of your document, right?
Got it.
And that kind of tells you if the doc is being effective or not.
Right.
The second thing that you can do is also look at what are the areas where there are support cases being raised.
Okay.
Now that could be great input for the scope of work, right?
Got it.
Saying these are the pages which need more attention, or this is the area of the product which needs more attention.
Got
So
it.
from a utilization perspective, that is all you can do really.
Thank you, Sachin.
I think Padmaja had a question, and I know we're at the top of the hour, but
Any free tool available? Yes. So if you search the web, Padmaja, there are enough linters available. Of course, you'll have to kind of customize it to what you're checking. So there are scripts available on the internet which will help you check for broken links. There are scripts available for you to check for broken images. Similarly, there are linters available for even MSTP checks. So you can pick these, uh, run the script, get a score, but putting it all together, either you will have to create a script of your own, or you'll have to just manually do that math. But yeah, the tools are available all over the web.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Sachin. And one more thing, topic level you told,
Yes.
is it because in our company it's more on the system process guidelines is what the users are expecting, because external users are very well aware of the application flow and everything.
Hmm.
System processing guide is more on, it's a mix of business and the technical part of it, how it works.
Okay.
So can that be covered as in that topic level? Because we can't
Definitely.
say that as a user guide. Yeah, we can say
So I
that as a
think,
user guide.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what you're referring to as business or operations versus and technical kind of put together in that guide, you are exactly talking about helping the user with their use case or user journey. So there is a business ask, and they will accomplish it using three or four of the topics. So you can definitely cover it as a topic level kind of a TOC, like I mentioned. But the one thing that you'll have to be aware of when you do that is know your audience level. Okay. Now it's a myth in our community that our documentation should be able to help anybody to install or anybody to do anything. That is impossible, right? Uh, there is no document in the world that can help everybody in the world perform some action. There is a certain level of knowledge that is required, especially with enterprise tools. And so what you have to figure out is what is that skill level or domain knowledge that you can really assume about that user. For example, if you're talking of a system administrator in a Linux lab, yeah, you can definitely assume that they know Linux. In which case, you don't have to write those Linux commands every time and say, okay, you use this command to copy this file from folder A to folder B. No, just say copy this file to folder B. So those are the kind of guiding principles that you'll have to use, right? Do your persona analysis. And by persona analysis, I really mean not a definition that it's a 40-year-old man plays football and all of that. What I mean is he knows Linux, he knows HTML, he knows JavaScript, he knows telecom domain with 20 years of experience, those kind of details, because that will help me assume what is the level of detail I need. Now, if your product is specially technical, then you don't want to kind of skip the details, especially if your user persona says that their knowledge level is very low. But if you're working with a high knowledge level in that domain and product, you can skip the field level information. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Great. I
Thanks.
think we're at the top of the hour, a little more. So thanks so much, Sachin. I know we probably just scraped the topic at the
Yes.
surface level, as you said.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I think things open up, things are opening up, and if we can, have an in-person thing soon, maybe we can have a much longer, in-depth sort of session. I think that would be really valuable. Uh, yeah. But meanwhile, yeah, thank you so much for this. And of course, people, know if you have any further questions, you can, I guess, reach out to him. And thank you for filling up the feedback form as well. So yeah, thanks so much, Sachin. Appreciate the session.
Thanks, everyone. I think it's a great investment on your part to kind of take out time to attend. So really, thank you for that. Thank you for the great questions. I hope you found the session informative, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have more questions. You can search